The first thing I noticed about him was that he never moved unless he meant it. He was standing near the far wall when I walked in, burgundy suit, no expression, a glass of something dark held loosely at his side like he'd forgotten it was there. The entire ballroom was buzzing. Laughter, crystal, the low thrum of a string quartet pretending this was a legitimate event. And he was completely still inside all of it, like a stone at the center of moving water. I looked away. I had a job to do. My name is Zara Ose, and I had not flown 14 hours from Lagos to Seoul to look at beautiful men in expensive suits. I had flown here because somewhere in this gilded, criminal ballroom were 3 bronze sculptures that had belonged to my father. Pieces he spent the last years of his life trying to recover. Pieces that were in a crate headed for a private buyer by morning if I didn't do something about it tonight. I straightened my emerald satin mini gown, lifted my chin, and walked in like I'd been invited. The gala was being held inside a converted palace, the kind of venue that makes crime feel like culture. Chandeliers dripping with light, champagne passed on silver trays. And along the far wall, displayed on elevated platforms like they belonged here, like nobody had taken them from anywhere, African bronzes, carved masks, royal ceremonial pieces pulled from institutions and private collections across the continent and funneled quietly into the hands of people who would never understand what they were holding. I saw my father's pieces from across the room, and I had to stop walking. 3 bronze figures, cast in Benin, older than any government in that room. My father had photographed them on a wooden table in his Lagos museum, and the photo was still on my phone. I had looked at it every day for 8 months. I started moving toward the display platform, keeping my eyes steady, my steps casual. Credentials tucked in my clutch. A cover story I had rehearsed until it felt like memory. I was almost there. That's when he stepped in front of me. He came from my left, smooth and unhurried, like he had all the time in the world and had simply decided to spend some of it blocking my path. Tall, broad, warm brown skin, and a smile so easy it should have come with a warning label. Nigerian-American accent when he spoke. Handsome in that specific, dangerous way, the kind of face that makes you want to trust it and warns you not to in the same breath. "You're going somewhere interesting," he said. "I'm going to look at the display." My voice was even. I was proud of that. "The display area is restricted for general guests." He smiled again. Wider this time. "I'm not a general guest." I reached for my press credential. He didn't wait to see it. His hand closed around my wrist, not brutal, not rough, just firm. Final. The kind of grip that says I've decided without saying anything at all. I looked down at his hand, then up at his face. "Let go," I said quietly. He didn't. The people nearest to us had gone still. Not the whole room, just the circle immediately around us, the way water goes glassy right before something breaks the surface. I felt it before I understood it. That specific hush that happens when someone powerful shifts their attention in your direction. I didn't see him move. One moment the man in the burgundy suit was a detail at the edge of my vision. The next he was close enough that I caught the faint smell of cedarwood and something colder underneath it, and his eyes were not on me at all. They were on the hand around my wrist. He said 3 words. Low. Unhurried. Almost bored. "Let go of her." I have replayed that moment more times than I will ever admit. Not because of what he said. Because of what happened after. The man holding my wrist, this large, confident, clearly dangerous man, released me like he'd touched fire. Not slowly. Immediately. And then he stepped back. Actually stepped back. And didn't say a single word. The crowd exhaled. I turned to look at the man in the burgundy suit. He was already looking at me. Dark eyes. Completely unreadable. The kind of face that's learned to give nothing away so thoroughly that the habit has become the face itself. I said I had it handled. 1 beat of silence. "I know," he said. And then he walked away. I stood there in my emerald gown in the middle of that criminal ballroom and felt 40 seconds rearrange something I couldn't name yet. The string quartet started playing again. Someone laughed across the room. The world resumed like nothing had split open. I told myself it was adrenaline. I went back to my hotel that night with photographs of the display pieces, but nothing else. No access. No contacts. No plan. I sat on the edge of my bed in the dark and thought about my father's hands, the way they looked when he talked about those bronzes. Like he was already touching them in his mind. I thought about the man in the burgundy suit for exactly 4 minutes before I made myself stop. My queens, welcome back to another irresistible mafia romance story. I missed you. Before we dive in, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I love knowing where my girls are. And if you're new here, don't forget to like, share with your friends, and subscribe. Stay with me, because this story is about to get intense. The package arrived the next morning while I was still in my silk cord set, laptop open, cold coffee at my elbow, going through every auction record I'd managed to photograph the night before. A knock. A hotel concierge. A flat black envelope with my name on the front, not my cover name. My real name. Spelled correctly. Inside was a single photograph. One of my father's bronzes, the smallest one, the ceremonial figure with the broken left arm that my father had described to me when I was 9 years old. On the back, written in clean black ink, were coordinates and a time. No signature. I turned the photograph over 3 times like something else was going to appear. Then I sat very still for a long moment and thought about what it meant that someone in the city knew exactly who I was, why I was here, and had chosen to send me a location instead of a warning. I told myself not to go. I knew I was going. The coordinates led to a private gallery space on the upper floor of a building that didn't list itself on any public registry. No sign outside. A single door that opened before I knocked. Inside, high ceilings, low lighting, and art on every wall that I was certain had never passed through a legitimate auction in its life. He was standing near the window in a charcoal 3-piece suit. No tie this time. Jacket open. Different from last night, but somehow the same temperature, controlled, deliberate, giving away absolutely nothing. Kong Seo-jin. I had spent the morning learning the name that went with that face, and the learning had not been reassuring. The name opened onto things I was not prepared to know, the kind of infrastructure that makes governments nervous and rivals disappear. He ran the most organized criminal network in Seoul. He was 34 years old and had never been charged with anything. He didn't greet me. He waited until I was fully inside the room, and then he said, "3 of your father's pieces moved through my network 6 weeks ago." I said nothing. Without my authorization, he continued. Someone used my name and my channels to move them. I don't allow that. Who? My voice came out steadier than I felt. That's what I'm finding out. He finally turned from the window and looked at me fully. I thought you should know it wasn't sanctioned. Why? I asked. Why would you tell me that? Something shifted in his expression. Not softened, shifted. Like a door that didn't open but showed you, briefly, that it existed. Because I don't like things happening inside what I've built that I didn't approve, he said. And because you stood in that ballroom last night without a single person in your corner and you didn't flinch. He paused. That deserves something. I looked at him for a long moment. At this man who was, by every measure I had, someone I should be afraid of. What do you want in return? I asked. Nothing yet, he said. That yet landed in the room and stayed there, filling up the silence between us with something that was not quite a threat and not quite a promise, and was somehow more unsettling than either. I left with nothing resolved and everything changed, and I didn't understand for 3 more days that the shift I felt walking out of that gallery was not caution. It was the beginning of something I had absolutely no framework for. I found Darius Cole on the 3rd day. Not because he was careless. Because I was desperate, and desperation sharpens you in ways that patience never does. I had been cross-referencing auction movement records, shipping manifests, and the handful of photographs I'd taken at the gala, and one name kept appearing in the margins of everything. Not loudly. Quietly. The way a person appears when they've learned to stay just outside the frame. Darius Cole. Seo-jin's most trusted lieutenant. The only black man in the upper ring of Seoul's most feared criminal network. Nigerian-American. 31. A background so clean it had clearly been cleaned. And his signature disguised, but his on the transport authorization for my father's bronzes. I sat with that information for a long time before I moved. Because Darius hadn't just moved stolen artifacts. He had moved these stolen artifacts. He had known whose they were. My father's name was in the provenance documentation, faded but legible. He had seen it and proceeded anyway. I needed to know why before I handed it to Seojin. Because once I handed it to Seojin, I lost control of what happened next. And whatever happened next to Darius Cole would not involve a courtroom. So I watched. I mapped his routines. I followed the threads quietly, methodically, in coffee shops and hotel lobbies and the backseat of taxis that took me to parts of Seoul my travel insurance definitely didn't cover. And then Seojin found me first. I was sitting on the steps outside a closed private museum, leather leggings, oversized camel blazer, a folder of printed documents in my lap and frustration written all over my face, when a black car rolled to a stop at the curb and he got out. Slate gray suit tonight. Perfectly fitted across the shoulders in a way that made me briefly forget what I'd been thinking about. He looked at me on those steps like he had been looking for me and wasn't surprised to have found me. "You've been avoiding my calls," he said. "You've been calling a number I didn't give you." "Yes," he said simply, like that required no further explanation. He sat down beside me on the steps, not crowding me. Close enough that I was aware of every centimeter of distance. He chose not to close. I could smell cedarwood again and something underneath it, warmer this time. Like the scent had learned me a little. I looked straight ahead. "What do you know about your father's connection to the Seoul art market?" he asked. The question landed sideways. I turned to look at him. "What do you know about it?" I asked first. My father spent 11 years trying to recover stolen African art through legitimate channels, I said carefully. He documented everything. He wrote letters to institutions. He worked with international bodies. He never stopped. I paused. He died 8 months ago. Heart failure. The doctors said it was natural. I heard the way I said that last sentence, and so did he. Seojin was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "You don't believe that." I didn't answer. Which was an answer. He turned his head and looked at me, really looked, the way people rarely do, and something in his expression shifted the way it had in the gallery. "That door again. Just a fraction. My mother collected things," he said. Quiet. Unprompted. Not art. Just objects. Small things she found in markets. Things that had belonged to other people. She said the history inside an object was more alive than the object itself. A pause. She died when I was 19. I've been trying to understand what I was supposed to protect since then. I didn't speak. I understood, bone deep, that Kang Seojin did not say things like that to people. That those words had come from somewhere. He kept behind several locked doors, and he had opened one of them and handed me something through it. I didn't know what to do with that, so I did nothing. Which, apparently, was exactly right. We sat on those steps for another 40 minutes. We talked about Lagos and Seoul, about fathers and mothers, about the particular loneliness of carrying a grief that doesn't have an easy shape. He asked questions that were too precise to be casual, and I answered them more honestly than I intended to. He told me almost nothing about himself, and somehow I left knowing more than I had words for. When I stood to go, he stood too, and we were briefly very close in the dark, and I felt the full weight of every inch of distance between us like a held breath. "You're getting closer to something," he said. "Don't get close without telling me first." Is that concern or a warning? He looked at me for one long beat. "Both," he said, and got back in the car. I walked back to my hotel with my folder under my arm and my heart doing something I refused to diagnose. I told him about Darius 2 days later. Not because I was ready. Because I ran out of time. A contact of mine, a gallery authenticator, who had been helping me quietly, sent me a message at midnight. The remaining 2 bronzes were being moved. New buyer. New timeline. 48 hours. I called Seojin. He answered on the second ring, which told me he had been waiting. I told him everything. The transport authorizations. The signature. The provenance documents Darius had seen and ignored. I spoke in a flat, steady voice, and I watched through my hotel window at the street below while I talked, and when I finished there was a silence on the line so complete it had a texture. "How long have you known?" he asked. 6 days. Another silence. Longer. "Why didn't you tell me immediately?" "Because I needed to understand the why before you handled the who," I said. Once you got involved, I knew Darius wouldn't be able to give me answers. He'd just be gone. The pause that followed was the most dangerous silence I'd heard from him yet. And I had heard several. You were protecting a man who stole from your father, he said slowly. I was protecting my right to understand what happened to my father, I said. There's a difference. He was quiet again. Then, I'll come to you. I want to be there, I said quickly. When you confront him. I want to look at him myself. Zara. I didn't come to you so you could go close a door I'll never see behind, I said. I need to be there. I need to hear him. A pause so long I thought he'd refused. Then his voice, low and careful, like he was making a decision he already knew he'd regret, where something you can run in. I almost laughed. I was not laughing. I showed up the next evening in a fitted black mini skirt, a sleek long-sleeve top, and ankle boots with a heel I was fully prepared to sprint in if necessary. Jean was already outside in an all-black suit, no tie, no pocket square, nothing decorative at all. Like he had dressed specifically to disappear into whatever came next. He looked at my outfit, then at my face. His expression did the thing it always did, settled into something unreadable, while his eyes said something entirely different. He said nothing. He opened the car door. I got in. We drove in silence for 11 minutes, and the air between us in that car was the most charged silence I had ever sat inside. Every time the city lights swept through the window and crossed his face, I looked straight ahead. Every time he shifted in his seat, I felt it in my spine. When we stopped, he turned to me. You stay behind me until I say otherwise. I'm not. Zara. Just my name. Said in a specific, quiet way that wasn't a command and wasn't a request and was somehow more compelling than either. Please. That please did something to me that I am still not entirely over. Fine, I said. But when it's time for me to speak, you let me. He looked at me for a moment, then nodded once and got out of the car. I followed him into the dark. The warehouse was on the outer edge of Seoul's industrial district, the kind of building that doesn't exist on maps and doesn't need to. No signage. No windows at street level. The kind of silence around it that isn't natural, that has been arranged. Two of Jean's men were already inside when we arrived. I didn't ask how they'd gotten Darius there. I didn't want the answer sitting in my chest while I needed to be steady. Darius was standing in the center of the space when we walked in. No restraints. No visible fear. He was in a dark jacket, arms loose at his sides, and when he saw me his expression did something complicated, not guilt exactly. Something older than guilt. Something that looked almost like relief. That was the first thing that threw me. Jean stopped 6 feet from him. I stayed one step behind and to the right, close enough to see Darius's face fully in the overhead light. Jean said nothing. He didn't need to. The silence itself was the question. Darius looked at me. Not at Jean. At me. I wondered when you'd find it, he said. His voice was calm. Almost gentle. I wondered how long it would take you. You knew whose pieces they were, I said. You saw my father's name on the documentation. Yes. And you moved them anyway. Yes. He exhaled slowly. Zara, I need you to hear what I'm about to say before you decide what it means. Can you do that? I felt Jean shift almost imperceptibly beside me. Tension moving through him like current through wire, controlled, contained, but absolutely present. Talk, I said. Darius looked at me for a long moment. Then he said, 7 months ago, a contract was placed on your life. The warehouse went completely still. Someone in the International Art Recovery Circuit discovered that you had acquired documentation your father had hidden, evidence that linked 3 European collectors directly to an organized African artifact trafficking network. People with money and the kind of connections that make problems disappear quietly. He paused. You were the problem they wanted to disappear. I heard my own breathing. I couldn't feel my hands. I found out through a contact who monitors those circuits, Darius continued. I had 48 hours to do something or you were dead before you ever boarded a plane to Seoul. He looked at me steadily. So I moved the bronzes. I used them as a bargaining chip. I sold them into the network with a condition attached. Your life untouched in exchange for the pieces entering the market quietly. No investigation. No Zara Ose. The silence that followed was the loudest thing I had ever heard. I wanted to say something. I had no words. My father's bronzes, the pieces he had died trying to recover, had been used to purchase my life without my knowledge. And the man standing in front of me had made that trade and then watched me fly to Seoul to investigate him for it. You could have told me, I said finally. My voice came out strange. Thin. If I told you, you would have refused the trade, he said. You would have chosen the investigation over your own safety. I know you. I know what those pieces mean to you. A pause. I made the call I could live with. I looked at him. This man with his easy smile and his careful hands and his terrible, loving logic. I didn't know whether I wanted to scream at him or sit down on the floor. I turned to look at Seo-jin. His face was doing something I hadn't seen before. Not the controlled blankness. Something underneath it, something working its way to the surface slowly, like heat through stone. He was looking at Darius, with an expression that had moved past anger into something quieter and more frightening. You used my network, Seo-jin said. Very quietly. Without telling me. You moved pieces through infrastructure I built, under my name, without my knowledge, and you're telling me now that you did it to save a woman I had never met. Yes, Darius said. He didn't flinch. And I'd do it again. The silence between them was a different kind, old, dense, layered with history I wasn't part of. These two men had clearly built something together over years. Trust in the kind of environment where trust is the most expensive currency there is. And Darius had spent some of it. On me. Seo-jin turned away. Just slightly. A quarter turned toward the wall. In any other man it would have been nothing. In Seo-jin it was enormous. Leave us, he said to his men. They moved without question. Then he looked at Darius. Go. We'll finish this conversation later. Darius looked at me one more time before he walked out. That same expression, old, complicated, a door closing on something he'd already decided. Then he was gone, and it was just the two of us in that warehouse, with all that weight between us. I didn't move for a long moment. Then my legs made a decision my mind hadn't approved yet, and I sat down on a crate behind me because standing suddenly required more than I had. Seo-jin turned. He looked at me sitting there, my black mini-skirt, my careful posture, my completely shattered composure, and he crossed the space between us without hesitation and crouched down in front of me so we were level. Eye to eye. His black suit jacket falling open at the sides. Breathe, he said. I am breathing. You're not. I breathed. He waited. He was very close, and I was very undone, and neither of us acknowledged either of those things out loud. Someone put a contract on my life, I said. Hearing myself say it made it more real. I didn't like that. Yes. And Darius traded my father's pieces. Yes. And I came here to investigate him, and the whole time I stopped. Pressed my lips together. I was not going to fall apart in a warehouse in Seoul in front of Kang Seo-jin. I had made no such promise about later, in private, but right now, no. You're angry, he said. I don't know what I am. You're angry, he said again, gently, like he was handing me something to hold on to. That's allowed. I looked at him. Right there in front of me, close enough that I could see the exact moment his expression stopped being managed and became something real. Concern. Actual, unguarded concern. It sat on his face like it wasn't used to being there. The contract, I said. Is it still active? A pause. Brief. But I caught it. I'm looking into it, he said. That's not an answer. It's the only one I have right now. His eyes held mine steadily. But you're not going to be touched. I need you to understand that. Why? I asked. And I wasn't asking about the contract anymore, and we both knew it. He looked at me for a long, full moment. The kind of look that says everything and commits to nothing. The kind that makes your chest ache from the weight of what isn't being said. Because some things matter, he said quietly, whether you plan for them to or not. He stood. I stood. We were close enough that the next breath I took was warm. His eyes dropped to my face once, briefly, like he was making an internal decision about distance, and then he stepped back. Just enough. Just barely enough. I'll take you back, he said. We drove back in silence again. But it was a different silence than before, not charged, not careful. The kind of silence that exists after something has been said that can't be unsaid, even though neither of us had said it yet. He walked me to the lobby of my hotel. He didn't come in. He stood at the entrance with his hands in his pockets, and the city lit up behind him, and he looked at me in a way that I felt from my throat to the soles of my feet. "Lock your door," he said. "I always lock my door." Tonight, he paused. "Make sure." I went upstairs. I locked the door. I stood in the middle of my hotel room in my black miniskirt and my ankle boots and stared at the ceiling for a very long time. Then my phone lit up with a message from an unknown number. For words only. "He didn't tell you everything." I stared at the screen. The name above the message wasn't saved. But the number had a Seoul area code, and whoever had sent it at the exact moment Seo Jin's car pulled away from the curb downstairs. Someone had been watching us. I didn't sleep. I lay on top of the hotel covers in the dark, phone face up on my chest, and stared at those 4 words until they stopped looking like language and started looking like a shape I couldn't identify. "He didn't tell you everything." I turned it over and over. The timing was too precise to be coincidence. Sent at the exact second Seo Jin's car left the curb. Whoever sent it had been outside, watching, waiting for him to leave before they reached me. That meant they knew about us. Whatever us even was. By morning, I had done 3 things. I had traced the number as far as I could, a burner, Seoul registered, untraceable past a certain point. I had gone back through every interaction with Seo Jin and held it up to new light, looking for what he might have kept from me. And I had decided, very deliberately, not to tell him about the message yet. Because the last time I held information back from him, it had been the right call. I needed to understand the shape of this before I handed it over. What I found took me until noon and turned my blood cold. The contract on my life, the one Darius had traded my father's bronzes to neutralize, had not been placed by the European collectors I'd been documenting. That trail was real, but it was a surface trail. Underneath it, funding the contract, coordinating the network that had moved the stolen artifacts across 3 continents, was a name that appeared nowhere publicly. A woman. Korean. Operating through 7 layers of legitimate business structures that would take an international task force 2 years to fully unravel. Her name, when I finally found it in a document that had not been meant for me to see, was Park Yun-ha. And the most recent photograph I could find of her, taken 18 months ago at a private function, showed her standing beside Kang Seo-jin. Not beside him the way associates stand. The way people stand when they have history. When distance has been chosen and still doesn't fully take. I sat with that photograph open on my laptop for a long time. Then I got dressed, a deep red wrap mini dress. Heels I chose deliberately because they made me feel armored, and I called Seo Jin and told him I needed to see him. My voice was even. I was proud of that. He said he'd come to me. He arrived in 40 minutes in a deep olive suit I hadn't seen before, perfectly cut, and he looked at my face the moment I opened the door and knew immediately that something had shifted. "What happened?" he said. I let him in. I turned my laptop toward him. I watched his face. He looked at the photograph for 3 full seconds. Then he looked at me. And in those 3 seconds, I saw something move through his expression that he couldn't fully contain. Not guilt, not quite, but the specific stillness of a man who has been found holding something he hadn't decided how to put down yet. "Park Yun-ha," I said. "Sarah. She funded the contract on my life," I said. "She's been running the artifact network from underneath. She's connected to everything, the gala, the buyers, the shipping routes, all of it." I paused. "And you know her?" He was quiet for a moment. Then he sat down, not in the chair, on the edge of the bed, elbows on knees, hands loosely linked. The posture of a man who had just set something heavy on the floor. "We were together," he said. "For years ago. For 2 years before that." I said nothing. When I ended it, she built her own operation. Parallel to mine. She used what she'd learned being close to me, my methods, my contacts, my infrastructure logic, and she replicated it. Separately. Quietly. He looked at his hands. I didn't know how far it had gone. I knew she was operating in adjacent networks, but I didn't know she had moved into artifact trafficking. I didn't know she'd targeted you. "Did you know she was in Seoul right now?" I asked. A pause. "I suspected." The word landed like a stone in still water. Suspected. He had suspected. While I was sitting across from him on museum steps talking about my father, while he was standing in that warehouse crouching in front of me telling me I wouldn't be touched. He had suspected that the woman behind all of it was someone he used to love, and he had not said one word. You told me you were looking into the contract, I said. I was. You were looking into her. Yes. I turned away from him. Walked to the window. The city below was bright and indifferent, and I pressed my fingers against the glass and tried to locate the feeling moving through me. It wasn't simple anger, it was more layered than that. It was the specific hurt of having trusted someone in a context where trust costs something, and discovering that the trust was not entirely returned. I was going to tell you, he said from behind me. When? When I was certain. When I had enough to give you the full picture instead of a suspicion that might have been wrong. A pause. I didn't want to hand you something incomplete and send you in a direction that hurt you. That's the same thing Darius said, I said quietly. About why he didn't tell me about the contract. Everyone in this city is making decisions about what I can handle. I turned around. I'm the one whose father died. I'm the one whose life was bought and sold without my knowledge. I am the only person in this situation with the actual right to decide what I can hold. He looked at me. He didn't argue. He didn't deflect. He just absorbed it, all of it, with that stillness that I had initially read as coldness and now understood was the opposite. It was the stillness of a man who takes things seriously, who lets weight land rather than deflecting it. You're right, he said. Simply. Completely. Those two words from this man, this controlled, guarded, careful man, undid more of me than anything else could have. I stayed at the window. He stayed on the edge of the bed. The city hummed outside, and inside the room it was very quiet and very warm. What does she want? I asked. Yunha, what is this actually about for her? Me, he said. Not with ego. Just fact. She wants to destabilize what I've built. The artifact network is partly financial and partly pointed. She's been dismantling things connected to me from underneath for 18 months. He paused. You became a target because your investigation threatened the network's revenue. But the contract was escalated, made personal, because you got close to me. I stared at him. She knows about us? She knows about the gala. She knows I intervened. He looked at me with an expression that was entirely unguarded for the first time since I'd met him. Yunha has always understood me better than I would like. She would have recognized what it meant. That I crossed a room for someone. The air between us did something I had no language for. What did it mean? I asked. My voice came out softer than I intended. He stood, crossed the room slowly, stopped in front of me with the city light at his back, and looked at me the way he'd looked at me on those museum steps, like he was seeing something he hadn't planned for and had stopped pretending he wasn't. You know what it meant, he said quietly. I did. I had known since that ballroom. Since I know. Since cedarwood on museum steps and pleas in a warehouse and the specific way he positioned himself between me and every room we walked into together without ever making it obvious. He raised one hand slowly, giving me every opportunity to step back, and touched my face. Just his fingertips. Against my jaw. The lightest possible contact, and it moved through me like it had weight. I haven't wanted to protect something in a long time, he said. Not like this. I covered his hand with mine. I felt him exhale, quiet, controlled, but real. We stayed like that for a moment that had no business being as significant as it was. No kiss. No dramatic collision. Just his hand on my face and mine over his, and the full charged weight of everything that had been building since an emerald gown and 3 words in a crowded ballroom. Then my phone rang. We both looked at it on the desk. Unknown number. Soul code. Same number as last night. I picked up. Put it on speaker. Seo Jean went completely still. A woman's voice filled the room. Calm. Accented. Precise. The kind of voice that has learned to be beautiful the way a blade learns to be sharp, deliberately, for effect. Miss Osei, I've been watching you since you arrived. You're very good at finding things. A pause. You found Darius. You found the documentation. You even found me. Another pause, softer this time, and somehow colder. But there's one thing you haven't found yet. Something Seojin has known about your father's death since before you ever landed in Seoul. I looked at Seojin. His jaw was set. His eyes were on the phone. He said nothing. Ask him, the voice said, what he found in the shipping records. Ask him whose authorization appeared on the original export of your father's collection, not the bronzes. The full collection. 8 years ago. Ask him who signed off on the first theft. The line went dead. The room was silent. I lowered the phone slowly. Then I turned to look at Seojin fully, this man who had crossed a room for me, who had crouched in front of me in a warehouse, who had just touched my face like I was something worth being careful with. What is she talking about? I asked. My voice was very quiet. He looked at me for a long moment. And in that moment I saw it, not guilt, something more complicated. The expression of a man standing at the edge of something he knew was going to change everything and had been trying to figure out how to carry it to me without dropping it. Sarah, he said. What did you find in the shipping records? He took a breath. Slow. Measured. The original authorization for your father's collection 8 years ago, the first theft, before any of this, it was signed by someone inside my organization. He paused. Someone who was inside my organization. Before I knew what they were doing. Before I knew your father existed. His eyes held mine. I found it 4 days after the gala. I've been trying to find out how deep it goes before I... For days after the gala, I repeated. You have known for weeks. I needed to understand the full extent. You knew. My voice broke on the second word. Not into tears. Into something harder. You knew that someone in your organization was connected to the first theft of my father's life's work, and you sat across from me on those steps, and you let me talk about him, and you said nothing. He didn't look away. Yes. That single word, honest, undeflected, offered without excuse, was the most painful thing he could have given me. Because it meant there was no misunderstanding to resolve. No miscommunication to untangle. He had known and he had chosen, and now I was standing in a hotel room in Seoul with his cologne still faint in the air and the full weight of that choice between us. I walked to the door. Opened it. Sarah. I need you to leave, I said. Please. He crossed the room. Stopped at the door. We were close again, impossibly close, and he looked at me with an expression that was entirely open and entirely helpless and entirely too late. I was going to tell you, he said quietly. I need you to know that. I know, I said. And I closed the door. I stood with my back against it for a long time. The city noise came through the window, distant, indifferent, continuous. I pressed my palms flat against the door behind me and breathed. Then I walked to my desk. Opened my laptop. Pulled up everything I had on Park Yunha, on the shipping records, on the name that had signed the original authorization 8 years ago and destroyed my father's life so quietly he never even knew exactly where it had started. If Seojin wasn't going to bring me the full picture, I was going to build it myself. I was still working at 2 a.m. when a package arrived. Hand-delivered. No courier company. A flat envelope slipped under my door while I was sitting 6 feet away. Inside, a single key. Hotel branded. A room number written in black ink on a card. On the back of the card, in the same clean handwriting as the coordinates that had started all of this, one sentence. There's someone in this hotel who can tell you everything. Room 1408. She's been waiting for you to be ready. I turned the key over in my hand. I looked at the door. At my laptop. At the bronze figurine sitting on the nightstand, the one that had been returned to me, the one I'd been sleeping beside like a talisman, like the piece of my father I'd managed to get back. I picked up the key. And somewhere below me, in room 1408, I was almost certain I already knew whose voice was going to greet me when that door opened. If you've made it this far, my love, you already know you need to subscribe. Hit that button, leave me a comment, and tell me, did you see any of that coming? Because this story is far from over, and trust me, you do not want to miss what happens in that room.